this is my 4.1 assignment, looking at the ethical and legal issues that can come up with research and how to avoid these, and also what the consequences might be if ethically your research isn't right or isn't correct, and if there potentially the legal issues that could follow this unethical practice. To begin with, we'll look at the as a little introduction, we'll look at the Nazis and what they did during the Second World War, which really was almost the catalyst for change in looking at the ethics and legal issues that are based around research. So obviously the Nazis during the Second World War carried out practices on the Jews that were often causing physical harm and mental harm, but in most cases, or in some cases, they actually resulted in death. And one example of one of these experiments that took place in the Second World War was when they used low pressure chambers to determine sort of the maximum altitude in which German parachuters could, if their plane was damaged, could parachute out of their plane, their damaged plane from, in order and still be safe. Of course, this led to a lot of people dying, particularly, and a lot of other physical problems that came around with this. And also it's important to mention that prior to 1940 there was no code of conduct for any human experiments. The second important sort of milestone in changing the ethics and legal issues around research was the Zimbardo research project, and this was based around the fact that looking at whether in a guards and prisoner situation, whether guards were brutal and aggressive because of their own emotions, or whether this was because of the environment they were actually in. And right from the very beginning of his test, he ethically broke rules, as when the prisoners were taken into the prison system that he had set up, the jail system, he took them in, blindfolded them, and they were arrested as if they would normally be arrested by the guards. And so they weren't unblindfolded until they actually got inside the prison's system. Of course, ethically, this deception is incredibly unethical, and actually led on to cause them some quite bad side effects, as they also weren't quite made aware of quite how intense the life inside the prison would be. So after a couple of days, nothing was really happening. However, the prisoners, it started to get a bit too much for them, and this led the prisoners to actually revolt and almost try and break out. And then the guards regained control and them started becoming aggressive and fairly brutal towards them, almost treating the prisoners like their puppet. Some prisoners it was too much for, and they suffered mental breakdowns, and were actually Zimbardo was forced to take them out for their own welfare. And some of the stuff that the guards were doing was causing physical harm to the prisoners. There were 10 prisoners and 11 guards, and the guards were working in sort of sets of 3. So they would be working for 8-hour shifts, which would manage the prisoners that were in rooms of 3. And overall, Zimbardo got very badly criticised for this, because obviously it was a highly unethical practice that caused a lot of the people inside great physical and mental health issues. The final research project to look at that is one of the majorly criticised research projects is the investigation by Milgram. He actually wanted to see whether there was a sort of a conflict between the authority and what instructions that people are giving, and the actual what people thought was right and wrong, what personal conscience. And so, in order to do this, he paired off 40 males, so that what they thought was a random choice between teacher and learner, so like they thought it was randomly selected, was in fact not. And this was one of the forms of deception that Milgram used. The learner was then put on a chair where he had to remember a list of names, and from that he'd be asked questions about the lists of words he saw earlier. Most of the time the learners were actually getting these wrong, and then the teacher would every time the learner got a question wrong, the teacher would have to flick a switch to shock the learner, and this would start at 15 volts and lead to more deadlier 450 volts. And of course the volta, and then obviously some people's conscience was telling them that they didn't want to do it when it started to get to painful levels. However, they were pressured into continuing the test, so it could be argued that the right to withdraw, although they were finally granted their right to withdraw, the participants were very, very pressured to carry on the test, which of course is incredibly unethical. And the whole pressure around the test and everything that sort of the deception and that was incredibly unethical and criticised majorly of his work. You can see here a little timeline of the ethics and how it's changed over time. So as you can see, prior to 1947, when the Nazis did go through, put the Jews through all their horrible tests that they carried out, there was no code of conduct for what was unethical, what was legal or unlegal. Nuremberg then introduced a code of conduct, and this was followed up by sometime later by the Declaration of Helsinki. The set of principles were then introduced, which are similar to the things we see today with the ethics and how nowadays researchers interpret what is right and what is wrong. BASES, the British Association of Sport and Exercise, is basically like the head governing body of today's research into anything related to sports and exercise science. So they have a number of jobs, the first of which is kind of to do all the paperwork to produce all the paperwork that needs to be completed before a sports science examination can take place. So they will produce a project form. Along with the project form, there's a code of conduct to say what is unethical and what needs to be met legally and ethically before the examination or research can take place. this then from that code of conduct and making sure that everything meets that code of conduct, ethical clearance can be given, and the investigation that wants to take place can take place. They also reward researchers with strong backgrounds that have had positive results from their tests, and also have also always worked ethically, and also always done stuff sort of to the book and correctly with accreditations. This is just basically a very important certification for any researchers, and it just means that it shows their experience and their quality at taking out and carrying out tests. And basically the whole job of BASIS, as well as making sure that they do have everything ethically correct and ensure that no tests that shouldn't go ahead do go ahead. They also promote and want to maintain and enhance sport exercise science and the way it relates to sort of behaviour. Moving on to definitions, starting with institutional ethics and review committees. These are basically committees. This is a type of committee used in research that has been formally designed to approve and monitor and review behavioural and biomedical research. Ethical clearance is clearance given to research that integrity embodies a range of good research and practice and conduct. So this kind of includes stuff like fairness, accuracy, protection of human sort of well-being. Moving on to risk benefit analysis. This is when the benefits of what the final outcome of the research actually outweighs the risks. If this is the other way around and the risks outweigh the benefits, and of course the test is then unethical, maybe not legal, and will therefore not take place. Volunteers, whenever you're doing a research project, whoever is involved has to be a volunteer. You can't force people to be involved in your research project. Informed consent is permission granted in the full knowledge of the possible consequences of the practice. So if there was anything that could go wrong potentially, or they would not, basically they give their permission to take part in the test knowing what the final outcome is. This is normally given by parents when their kid is under the age of 18 and wants to or is going to participate in some research. What right to withdraw is basically anyone's human right to withdraw from the process of the research and not to carry on. This can take place at any time. This can even take place after the actual research has taken place and their results maybe haven't been announced yet. They can still withdraw and those results will therefore not be revealed. Health and medical screening question is a questionnaire which takes place that looks at the individual's previous health. It helps to detect health risks or problems. This could be of the sort of history, health-wise, of the individual. This is a confidential questionnaire that will take place at the beginning of every research project to ensure that something that the researcher might, the person doing the research might have to do isn't going to cause them any harm because they've got previous injuries or any previous problems.